by a Reverend Barber. I didn't know who Reverend Dr. Julian Barber is, so I Googled him. And I learned that he is a big deal in human rights movements in the United States. I found out that he's a national leader committed to, I quote, restructuring America itself. He's past president of the North Carolina chapter of the NAACP. He's been a pastor at Greenleaf Christian Church in Goldsboro, North Carolina for 30 years. He's founder and leader of the Moral Mondays movement, which is a collaboration of 140 organizations dedicated, quote, to save the soul of America. And that organization has morphed into the Poor People's Campaign. He's an author. He's a national speaker. He's a faculty member at Yale University Divinity School, where he'll direct a new Center for Public Theology and Public Policy. Sandy told me that he was a keynote speaker at the 2016 UUA General Assembly. And another friend reminded me that he's a frequent guest on the Morning Joe program of MSNBC. So we went. We attended his talk at the University of Chicago. Reverend Barber is smart, he is passionate, and he has what has been described as a soaring oratorical style. We were inspired. We decided that his message is so compelling that it needs to be shared as widely as possible, and that is our goal today.
Dr. Barber writes, quote, "The resistance to extremist forces is a confirmation of our moral cause." I've always considered myself as having a fairly good understanding of political history of the social movement we are seeing today. But hearing Dr. Barber lay out the blueprint of both the progress and the backlash dating from the Civil War was both eye-opening and frightening. He connects the dots. So let me share what Reverend Barber calls the first Reconstruction. It starts, of course, with the Civil War. The Civil War made the first Reconstruction possible. It was an immense cost, 620,000 deaths. But it was also an immense gain, the freeing of 4 million human beings. The first Reconstruction, the movement really began in the shadow of slavery, amid the wreckage of the Civil War. Prior to the war, abolitionists had challenged America with America's own words in its Constitution and in the Bible, and made it a moral critique of slavery. Right after the war, many blacks and whites in the South saw themselves as allies. Poor white farmers and newly freed black people formed a fusion coalition. By 1868 to 1870, every state house in the South was controlled by a progressive black-white fusion coalition. Some of them joined. The coalition used a moral framework to rewrite state constitutions all over the South, guaranteeing national citizenship, equal protection under the law, the right to vote, the right to education, the right to sit in the jury box, and other rights. In Reverend Barber's home state of North Carolina, the Constitution included the rights of all people to life, liberty, the fruits of their own labor, and the pursuit of happiness. So now we have the second Reconstruction, and that began in the 50s, almost 100 years after the first Reconstruction. Blacks, whites, Latinx, young people, Jews, Catholics, Protestants, Christians, and Muslims came together to build what Reverend Barber calls fusion moral. 1954, we have Brown versus the Board of Education. It was a decision by 9 white justices and 1 former member of the Ku Klux Klan who were pushed by Thurgood Marshall's team of Jewish, Black, and white lawyers on moral grounds, and they overturned separate but equal. Marshall's argument used the deep moral framework to challenge segregation in education. Let's not forget that at that time, at that moment, there were 17 states that had laws that required segregated schools, and 4 more that permitted it. Emmett Till was murdered in 1955, and his mother left the nation with his body. The courage that was shown galvanized the civil rights movement. Rosa Parks was a leading figure in the civil rights movement, organizing long before the Montgomery bus boycott. And there's Bayward Person, Black gay leader, the civil rights movement, who said, we gotta do some jazz, we gotta bring gospel, we gotta bring Gandhi, we gotta bring the social movement and those radical churches that fought against slavery. We gotta bring them all together. Fusion Coalition was formed. The immense gain brought by the Second Reconstruction came basically through federal legislation, 1964. According to Reverend Barber, it was a moral fusion movement that moved LBJ when all the people of different faiths and colors come together and demand from a moral perspective. It touches the nation's conscience.
Reverend Barber also analyzed and described the backlash to American struggles for justice and freedom throughout the U.S. history and the strategies of divide and conquer, another place where he connected the dots of what has happened over and over. He wants us to recognize that all of the fears and all of the hatreds dividing us are connected. He recommends first understanding this connection, which will lead us to the formation of fusion politics as a strategy to defeat them. So a quick reminder of the violent backlash to that first Reconstruction. After a short period of interracial alliances in every southern state, the violent backlash by whites gave us the Ku Klux Klan and Jim Crow. Jim Crow apartheid lasted almost 100 years. Violent backlash to that second civil rights reconstruction, it began with the killing of movement leaders, and it has continued with the defunding of many basic public services, the ever-present goal to lower taxes, and the strong support of states' rights. Examples of this divide and conquer strategy that illustrate Reverend Barber's blueprint include for whites who've been convinced to reject government anti-poverty programs, thinking they would primarily help blacks who are not as deserving of help. Affluent, hard workers who've been made to believe that poor people are lazy or undeserving of a living wage or universal health care or affordable housing because they're lazy. Heterosexual people who've been made to believe that LGBTQ people are sick or dangerous or a threat to families or children. Legislators voting for anti-abortion laws that criminalize healthcare providers and deny women control over their bodies, they purport to save lives, putting them, in their opinion, on the moral side of justice. Native-born citizens who've been made to believe that the cruel treatment of undocumented immigrants and refugees is somehow unavoidable to protect us from a dangerous human invasion. And finally, fear of universal voting that has led legislators to increase barriers to voting access under the guise of protecting voter integrity. 50 years after the 1964 civil rights legislation, Reverend Barber believes that the Third Reconstruction now holds the promise of healing our nation's wounds and birthing a better future for all. His optimism, and that was one of the things that was so good for us, this optimism is really clear that we are on the cusp of a Third Reconstruction. And that's based on his belief that more and more of us are recognizing the compelling need for change. We have witnessed an avalanche of extremism, his words. We have witnessed the violence that has resulted from white supremacy, anti-black racism, anti-LGBTQ attacks, anti-abortion legislation, anti-immigrant policies, and all of these have shocked millions of Americans. Reverend Barber's response is that, quote, we must work to help people see how these moral issues are connected.
In my experience, UUs like to end sermons with a challenge. Well, Reverend Barber has 14 of them. Jean and I picked out 3. We figured that's what we could manage. So, for the first challenge, use moral language to frame and critique public policy. He quotes, we cannot allow conservatives to hijack the powerful language of faith. Neither can we let liberals pretend that moral convictions are not in play in public policy debates. Every budget is a moral document, or it is an immoral one. 2, recognize the centrality of race. In his words, America's first and second Reconstruction sought to heal the wounds of race-based slavery, America's original sin. Our third Reconstruction must be anti-racist. Is the real issue today race versus class? The answer, yes, it's race and class. Class divisions cannot be understood apart from a society built on white supremacy. Our moral movement must be committed to the long-term work of achieving racial freedom. And here's where the UUs can dig into the dirt. He says, political power of fusion coalitions is based upon the diversity of the electorate that recognizes and understands common interest. He adds, extremists already have figured this out. That is why the focus has been on dividing potential allies. We have to see every election as part of a collaborative moral agenda. We need to educate on candidates, and we need to get active. I can add that the UU vote has made a difference. We wouldn't have Wisconsin Supreme Court judge without all of the UU churches sending postcards to Wisconsin and getting them to vote. We conclude on Dr. Reverend Barber's clarion call. When the rejected get together, we can in fact redeem America from hate and discrimination. When the rejected join hands, together becomes the instrument of redemption, and we can revive and ensure the promise of life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness and equal protection under the law. The care for the common good will never be taken away or forfeited for anyone at any time and anywhere.
Close with one of my favorite hymns by Holly Near, number 170. We are a gentle, angry people. Let's do the first 4 verses.